The city lights of Chicago painted dancing mosaics on the ceiling of their apartment, a silent ballet Clara and Ethan had watched 1,000 times. Their life, much like their 19th floor view, felt curated to perfection. 2 climbing careers, a circle of witty friends, and a love that was supposed to be the unshakable foundation of it all. Ethan would bring her coffee in the mornings, the steam from the mug mingling with the scent of his cologne as he kissed her goodbye. It was a comfortable, predictable rhythm, the kind people wrote novels about. But even the most beautiful facade can hide the deepest cracks. The hairline fracture in their idyllic life had a name: Noah. Noah was a relic from Clara's college days, a 3-year relationship that had gracefully dissolved into a friendship she cherished. Or so she told herself. When she and Ethan first started dating, Ethan had been admirably cool about it. He'd shaken Noah's hand, laughed at his jokes, and treated him like any other friend. But after the wedding rings were on their fingers, a subtle chill began to creep in. It started with small things. A text from Noah would light up Clara's phone late at night, a shared inside joke from a decade ago. Her laugh would echo in the quiet apartment. "What's so funny that he needs to tell you at midnight?" Ethan would ask, his eyes not leaving the page of his book, but his voice a note too flat. "Oh, stop it," she'd say, rolling her eyes with a practiced ease. "You're being ridiculous. We're just friends." She'd wield the word friends like a shield, never stopping to consider it might be a poor defense against the slow poison of doubt. She told herself Ethan's jealousy was a small flaw in an otherwise perfect man, a thing to be managed, not understood. 9 months after their wedding, a different kind of shock disrupted their rhythm. 2 missed pills during a chaotic weekend away with friends. Clara stared at the positive pregnancy test with a terror that felt like ice in her veins. Their 5-year plan, so meticulously drafted over wine and takeout, had no room for a baby in year 1. But when she told Ethan, his face broke into a grin of such pure, unadulterated joy that it momentarily stunned her. Before her morning sickness had even fully set in, he was downloading parenting apps and highlighting passages in books with titles like The Expectant Father. Coincidentally, Noah, who had been working in Seattle, was transferred back to Chicago 3 months into her pregnancy. He immediately appointed himself her unofficial pregnancy buddy. He'd appear with ginger candies for her nausea and text reminders for her to drink water. Ethan noticed immediately. "Doesn't Noah have his own life to worry about?" he'd ask, his jaw tight as Clara's phone buzzed with another check-in. "He's just being supportive," she'd reply, genuinely baffled. "Why can't you just appreciate having another person looking out for me?" She saw it as a network of care. Ethan saw it as an invasion. As her belly swelled, so did Noah's involvement. He'd show up with takeout on nights Ethan worked late. He offered to drive her to appointments if Ethan's schedule was tight. He even attended a childbirth class with them when a last-minute crisis kept Ethan at the office, sitting beside Clara and diligently taking notes. Looking back, she could almost pinpoint the moments: the tightening of Ethan's hand on the steering wheel, the forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. But at the time, she was blissfully, willfully blind. The breaking point arrived during her 7th month. They were in the nursery, the scent of fresh paint still hanging in the air. Ethan had just finished assembling the crib, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's not normal, Clara," he said suddenly, his voice low. "It's not normal for your ex-boyfriend to be this involved in our pregnancy, in our life." Clara, who had been folding a tiny onesie, bristled instantly. "I can't believe you. I'm pregnant and emotional, and you're trying to control me. He's a good friend who cares about me." Ethan stepped closer, his face etched with a pain she refused to see. "He's not just a friend, Clara," he said, his voice shaking with a frustration that had been building for months. "He's your ex-boyfriend who's clearly still in love with you. And you're either too blind to see it, or you enjoy the attention too much to stop it." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. "That's a horrible thing to say," she whispered, her own voice rising. "You're supposed to be my husband, my support system. Not the one trying to isolate me when I need people the most." The chasm between them had never felt wider. It was a deep, silent canyon carved out by years of unspoken resentments and ignored boundaries, and they were standing on opposite edges, with no bridge in sight. The first contraction seized her with a sharp, electric jolt 3 weeks before her due date. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was at a work conference 2 hours away. She called him immediately, and the panic in his voice mirrored her own. He was leaving right now, he promised. He'd break the sound barrier if he had to. An hour later, he was stuck in a hellish gridlock on the interstate, a multi-car pileup blocking all lanes. Clara timed her contractions, her breath catching as they grew closer, stronger. The rational part of her brain told her to wait for her husband. The panicked, primal part screamed for help. Without a second thought, she called Noah. He was at her door in 15 minutes flat, his face a mask of calm competence. He guided her to his car, carried her hospital bag, and navigated the city traffic with an unnerving efficiency. By the time she was checked into the labor and delivery room, the contractions were rolling over her like relentless waves. Noah was right there, a steady anchor in the storm. He held her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. He fetched ice chips without being asked. He advocated for her with the nurses when the pain stole her ability to speak. Ethan arrived 4 hours later, looking like he'd been through a war. His hair was disheveled, his tie was loosened, and his face was pale with stress. The moment he walked into the room, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick and heavy. He gave Noah a cold, clipped nod. Noah, who had been sitting in what was so obviously the partner's chair right next to her bed, didn't immediately move. "How are you feeling, babe?" Ethan asked, coming to the opposite side of the bed, his voice strained. "Hanging in there," she managed, then immediately cried out as another contraction ripped through her. She turned her head, not towards her husband, but towards the other man in the room. "Noah, can you press on my back, like the nurse showed you?" She didn't notice it then, caught in her own world of pain, but she would replay the image in her mind for years to come. The way Ethan's face fell, a swift, devastating collapse of hope as Noah jumped to her side, his hands expertly finding the exact spot on her lower back, demonstrating a technique they must have learned together while her husband was fighting his way to her side. The next 18 hours were a blur of agony, exhaustion, and the dispassionate shuffle of medical staff. Ethan tried his best to take over the support role, but it was awkward. He felt like an intruder in his own life. Noah didn't pick up on the subtle, or perhaps not so subtle, hints to leave. He stayed, a silent, watchful presence in the corner, a constant reminder to Ethan of his own perceived failure. At 5:37 a.m., their daughter Lily arrived with a thin, piercing cry. Clara was completely worn out, a hollowed-out vessel of relief and fatigue. The nurse cleaned the baby while the doctor attended to Clara. Through the haze, she saw tears in Ethan's eyes. Even Noah, standing near the door, looked emotional. A nurse, beaming, approached the bed with a tiny blanket-wrapped bundle. "Do you want to hold your daughter?" This was the moment. The singular, infinitesimal point in time on which her entire life would pivot and break. She didn't see it coming. She looked up, her vision still blurry, and saw both men standing there, two statues waiting for a sign. Without thinking, her mind clouded by drugs and exhaustion, she gestured, not to her husband, but to her ex-boyfriend. "Let him hold her first," she murmured, her voice raspy. "He's been here from the beginning." The words dropped into the sterile room like a stone into a silent pond. The nurse hesitated, her professional smile faltering as she glanced between the two men, uncertainty clouding her face. Ethan went completely white. His mouth opened slightly, as if to protest, but no sound came out. The room was utterly silent, save for the baby's soft, gurgling noises. "Are you sure?" the nurse asked, her voice a low whisper, clearly sensing she was standing on a landmine. "Yeah, it's fine," Clara said, still not registering the magnitude of the bomb she had just detonated. "Noah, come meet my daughter." With visible reluctance, the nurse placed the newborn into Noah's arms. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face, his own expression one of pure wonder. "She's perfect, Clara," he whispered. A tired, strange smile touched Clara's lips. Seeing him hold her felt complete. It wasn't until she glanced over at her husband that she realized something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. He had stepped back, pressing himself against the wall as if for support. His face was a mask of such profound hurt and shock that it finally, belatedly, pierced through her fog. He looked like a man who had just watched his world burn to the ground. And he knew who had struck the match. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, her voice laced with genuine, naive confusion. The question was a spark in a room full of gasoline. "What's wrong?" Ethan repeated, his voice low and shaking with a controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shout. You just gave our daughter to your ex-boyfriend to hold before me. Her father. The way he said it, the sheer, raw agony in his voice, made her stomach drop. But years of defensiveness were a hard habit to break. Oh my God, don't make this a big deal, she snapped, her immediate reaction to deflect, not to understand. He was here first, and he's been helping the whole time. You'll get to hold her next. That's not the point, Clara, Ethan said, his voice tight. That was supposed to be our moment. Mine and yours and our daughter's. Not his. Noah shifted awkwardly, still cradling the baby. Maybe I should give her to you, man, he said to Ethan, finally seeming to read the toxic atmosphere. No, he's just overreacting, Clara said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. She turned her glare back to Ethan. Why are you trying to create drama right now? I just gave birth. Can you stop making everything about you for 5 minutes? The hurt in Ethan's eyes deepened, hardening into something else, something colder. Before he could respond, Clara's phone pinged on the bedside table. It was a message from Noah. While they were arguing, he had taken a selfie with the baby and sent it to her. She reflexively picked up the phone and opened the picture. Ethan watched her do it, his expression turning to stone. Seriously? He said, his voice dripping with disbelief. You're checking your phone. Right now. It's just a picture, she said, holding up the phone as if it were evidence of her innocence. Look how cute they are together. Ethan stared at the picture on the screen, the man who wasn't her husband holding the child who was supposed to be theirs, and then at her. He looked at her as if he'd never truly seen her before. I'm going to get some air, he said finally, his voice devoid of all emotion. He turned toward the door. Ethan, don't be ridiculous, she called after him. Come hold your daughter. He paused at the doorway, his back to her. He looked back over his shoulder, his gaze falling on the three of them. Her in the hospital bed and Noah, still cradling their newborn. Is she? He asked quietly, the question hanging in the air like a ghost. Then he walked out. The next day was a hollow, silent war. Ethan stayed in the room, but he was a ghost. He held the baby with a silent, desperate tenderness, or stared blankly at his phone. When Noah texted asking if he could visit, Clara said yes without a second thought. When he arrived, carrying a bouquet of flowers, Ethan's whole body tensed. I thought we'd have some family time today, Ethan said, his voice quiet. We are, she replied breezily. Noah's just stopping by to check on us. That's not what family means, Clara, he muttered, but she was already laughing at something Noah said. Later, a nurse bustled in to check Clara's vitals. She smiled warmly at Noah, who was cooing at the baby in the bassinet. Dad, she said, would you like to do some skin-to-skin with the baby while I work with Mom? Before Clara could correct her, Noah laughed. Oh, I'm not the dad, just the best friend. The nurse's face flushed with embarrassment. Ethan, who had overheard the exchange from his chair, didn't say a word. He just stood up, took Lily from the bassinet, and sat in the chair furthest from Noah, holding his daughter to his chest as if to protect her. When they were finally ready for discharge, the tension was a physical presence in the room. Noah might stop by the apartment later, Clara mentioned casually while packing a bag. He picked up some groceries for us. Ethan stopped folding a baby blanket. Clara, I don't want him at our apartment today. Why not? He's just dropping off food. Because I would like one day, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Just one day with you and our daughter, without your ex-boyfriend being involved. She sighed dramatically. You're still on this? I thought you would have gotten over it by now. Gotten over what, exactly? He shot back, his control finally snapping. The fact that you keep disrespecting our marriage? That you care more about his feelings than mine? That you seem to want him more involved in our daughter's life than her own father? Now you're just being ridiculous, she said, falling back on her old refrain. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, a look of bleak clarity in his eyes. I need to get some air, he said, grabbing his jacket. I'll be back before discharge. He wasn't. By 1 p.m., after dozens of unanswered calls and texts, Clara was a storm of fury and worry. She called Noah to come pick them up. When they got to the apartment, the first thing she saw was the space where Ethan's suitcase should have been. A quick check of the closet confirmed it. His clothes were gone, his laptop was gone. On the polished granite of the kitchen counter lay a single white envelope with her name on it. Her hands shaking, she handed the sleeping Lily to Noah and tore it open. The letter was short. "Clara," it began. "I can't do this anymore. The past few days have made it clear that I am not a priority in your life, or in our daughter's. Having my child handed to another man before me was the final straw. I need some space to think about whether this marriage can work. I'll be staying at my brother's PZ. I'll reach out about arrangements to see the baby. Please don't contact me." "What the hell?" she breathed, the letter fluttering from her fingers onto the counter. He had actually left. A swell of hot, indignant anger, not sadness, rose in her chest. "What's wrong?" Noah asked gently. "He left," she said, her voice rising. "He took his stuff and left. Who leaves their wife and newborn baby? What kind of man does that?" "Let me see," Noah said, leaning over to read the letter. "Wow. That's intense." "It's completely irresponsible is what it is," she fumed, the true meaning of the letter not yet sinking in. "He's throwing a tantrum because I let you hold her first. Who cares who held her first?" Noah shifted uncomfortably. "I mean," he started. "I can see how that might have been important to him." "Not you too," she snapped, turning on him. The collapse was complete. She just didn't know how deep the rubble went. For 3 days, Clara operated in a haze of self-righteous fury. She posted a thinly veiled status on Facebook. "Nothing shows a man's true character like how he acts when things don't go his way." Apparently, some fathers think it's okay to abandon their one-day-old daughter because they didn't get to hold her first. Single motherhood, here I come. The supportive comments from friends who only knew her side of the story fueled her sense of victimhood. Then she got a text from Ethan. "I'll be by tomorrow at 2 p.m. to see the baby. Please have Noah not be there." When he arrived, he looked terrible. He hadn't slept. Dark circles bruised the skin under his red-rimmed eyes. A scruffy beard was beginning to cover his jaw. "Can I hold her?" he asked, not even looking at Clara. She handed Lily to him, and his face instantly softened, the hard lines of anger melting away as he stared at the tiny, sleeping child in his arms. He sat on the edge of the couch, as far from Clara as possible. "So," she began, unable to resist poking the bear. "Are you done with your little tantrum?" He looked up, and the hardness snapped back into place. "This isn't a tantrum, Clara. This is me finally standing up for myself after years of being disrespected." "Years?" she scoffed. "That's a little dramatic, don't you think?" "No, it's not," he said quietly. "It's been the same pattern our entire relationship. Noah calls, you go running. Noah needs something. It takes priority over our plans. Noah's feelings always seem to matter more than mine." "That's not fair," she protested. "Noah's been helping me while you've been gone. I'm gone because you made it impossible for me to stay." His voice was tight with emotion. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to watch your wife hand your newborn child to another man first? To have that moment stolen from you?" For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced her armor of anger. Put that way, it did sound bad. But she was still too proud, too entrenched in her own narrative, to admit it. "You're overreacting. It wasn't that big of a deal." "It was to me," Ethan said simply. "And the fact that you still can't see that is exactly why I needed to leave." Before he left, he stood at the door, his hand on the knob. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about a formal custody arrangement." "Lawyer?" she repeated, the word hitting her like a slap. "Are you serious right now?" He looked at her, his eyes cold and resolved. "Yes. I'm filing for divorce." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Clara in a stunned, ringing silence. She immediately called her college friend Sophie, a sharp family law attorney. "These accusations are ridiculous," she fumed after forwarding Ethan's inevitable email. "I never cheated on him." Sophie was quiet for a long moment after reading through the preliminary notes. "Clara," she began cautiously, "emotional infidelity doesn't necessarily mean physical cheating. It means prioritizing another person emotionally over your spouse. Based on what you've told me, there might be some validity to his claims." "What? You're supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side," Sophie said patiently. "But you need to hear this. Courts don't look favorably on situations where one spouse has a very close, boundary-crossing relationship with an ex." As if things weren't complicated enough, a formal letter arrived from Ethan's lawyer a week later. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, and there was another request. A request so insulting, so outrageous, that Clara felt the air leave her lungs. "He wants a paternity test," she hissed to Sophie over the phone. He knows she's his. The real confrontation came when Ethan arrived for his next scheduled visit. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. A paternity test? That's what this has come to? She demanded as he rocked Lily in his arms. He looked up from the baby's face, and his gaze was direct and piercing. Do I, Clara? He asked, his voice chillingly calm. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you and Noah have been a lot closer than you've ever admitted. As she watched him, a memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. A memory she had buried deep. It was about 10 months ago. Ethan was away on a business trip. Noah had just moved back to town, and they'd gone out for drinks to celebrate. One drink had turned into many. The end of the night was a fuzzy, alcohol-soaked blur. She remembered laughing, leaning heavily on Noah's arm. She remembered the inside of his apartment, the scent of his cologne, the feeling of his lips on hers. And then, nothing. A black hole in her memory. A tiny spark of fear, cold and sharp, ignited in her stomach. It was a terrifying, unthinkable possibility. The accusation in Ethan's eyes was no longer just about a moment of disrespect in a hospital room. It was about a potential betrayal that was deeper and darker than anything she had ever dared to imagine. The spark of fear grew into a raging wildfire. Clara knew she had to talk to Noah. She invited him over under the pretense of needing help with a baby gadget, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan wants a paternity test, she said, her voice barely a whisper, once Lily was asleep in her bassinet. Noah's face went oddly blank. A paternity test? He repeated, his casual demeanor vanishing. Why would he want that? Clara looked him straight in the eye. Noah, I need you to be honest with me. That night after we went out for drinks, what happened? He swallowed, his gaze darting away from hers. We kissed. That's all. You passed out right after we kissed, on my couch. I put a blanket on you and slept in my bed. That's it. Are you sure? She pressed, a knot of dread tightening in her gut. Is there any reason at all that this test might not show Ethan is the father? Yes, that's it, he insisted. But his eyes wouldn't meet hers. There was a flicker of something there, guilt or fear, that made her wonder if he was telling the whole truth, or just the part of it he could live with. The court-ordered paternity test was scheduled for when Lily was 6 weeks old. The day of the test was a sterile, clinical nightmare. Cheek swabs for Ethan, his face a grim, unreadable mask, and for the tiny, oblivious baby. Those were the longest 5 days of Clara's life. Every minute was a form of torture, a slow drip of anxiety that eroded her certainty and her sanity. She swung wildly between furious indignation at Ethan's accusation and a sickening, churning fear that he might be right. On the 5th day, her phone rang. It was Ethan. I got the results, he said, his voice flat and hollow. Can you meet me at the park near my brother's place? The park was gray and windswept. Ethan was waiting on a bench, staring at the ground, a crumpled envelope in his hand. Clara sat beside him, the baby asleep in her carrier, the silence between them as vast and cold as the November sky. Just tell me, she said, unable to bear the suspense any longer. He didn't speak. He just handed her the envelope. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Her eyes skimmed past the legal jargon, the scientific probabilities, searching for the conclusion. And then she found it. A single sentence, printed in stark black ink. The alleged father, Ethan Mitchell, is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The world tilted sideways. The sounds of the park children laughing. A distant siren faded into a dull roar in her ears. No, she whispered, the word a puff of air. No, there must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Ethan said, his voice as hollow as a drum. I had them run it twice. Ethan, I don't understand, she pleaded, tears starting to stream down her face. How could this happen? I didn't think. Save it, he said, his voice suddenly hard as he stood up. The facts speak for themselves. Please, she begged, looking up at him, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. I honestly didn't know. I was so sure she was yours. He looked down, his gaze falling on the sleeping baby in her carrier, the child he had loved as his own for 6 excruciating weeks. She saw his eyes fill with tears, a raw and devastating grief. So was I, he said quietly. His voice broke on the last word. But she's not mine, and you've been lying to me our entire marriage. I wasn't lying, she insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. I really thought. Stop. He cut her off, the single word like a whip crack. Even if you didn't know for sure, you knew it was a possibility. A possibility you never told me about. I'm done, Clara. What happens now? She cried after him as he turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He paused and looked back at her one last time, his face a wasteland of sorrow. Now, he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, you call Noah and tell him he's a father. Clara sat on that cold park bench for what felt like an eternity, the damning letter clutched in her hand, the world remade into something ugly and unrecognizable. With a trembling finger, she dialed Noah's number. The results came back, she said, her voice breaking. She's not Ethan's. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. Are you sure? He finally asked. Yes. Which means she's yours. Noah, she sobbed. You're her father. I need some time to process this, he stammered. Can I call you back? He didn't call back. Not that day, not the next. When she finally reached him 3 days later, after a barrage of frantic texts and voicemails, his voice was distant, formal, changed. I need to think about what this means for my life, he said, the words clinical and cold. This wasn't part of my plan, Clara. It wasn't part of mine either, she snapped, her grief finally giving way to a white-hot rage. But she exists, and she's your responsibility too. I know, he said quickly, placatingly. I just need some space to figure things out. Space. That's what they all wanted. Ethan wanted space from her. Noah wanted space from his responsibilities. And she was left alone in the wreckage, with a baby whose very existence had shattered her life into a million pieces. Noah eventually agreed to his own DNA test, which confirmed what they already knew. But his enthusiasm for fatherhood, once so performative and grand, had evaporated. He offered financial support, but balked at the idea of regular visitation or overnight stays. I'm not ready to be a dad, he admitted during one of their increasingly tense conversations. Neither was I, she shouted, finally reaching her breaking point. The last piece of her self-delusion crumbled away. You wanted to be so involved when you thought she was Ethan's. You were right there, holding her first, playing house in my marriage. And now that you find out she's actually yours, you're running away? That was different, Noah muttered. I was just being supportive then. No, Clara said, the truth hitting her with the force of a physical blow. It was a moment of terrible, painful clarity. You were marking your territory. You liked the idea of being involved in our lives and undermining my marriage. You just didn't want the actual responsibility that came with it. 2 months after the paternity results, her divorce from Ethan was finalized. The last time she saw him was in the sterile, beige conference room of his lawyer's office, signing the final papers that legally severed their lives. He looked healthier, calmer. The hollowed-out look was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber peace. I hope you find happiness, Clara, he said as they parted, and the worst part was that she could tell he meant it. There was no malice left in him, only a vast, empty space where his love for her used to be. I'm sorry, she replied, the words feeling pitifully, laughably inadequate for the scale of the damage she had caused. Her daughter, Lily, is 6 months old now. Sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is silent and the city lights are dancing on the ceiling, Clara scrolls through old photos on her phone. Pictures of her and Ethan in happier times laughing on a beach, smiling at their wedding, his arm wrapped securely around her. She thinks about all the moments when she could have made a different choice. All the times she could have respected his feelings, listened to his pain, and put him first. All the boundaries she should have set but didn't. She used to think that letting her ex hold the baby first was a small, thoughtless mistake, a sweet moment between friends that was blown out of proportion. Now she knew the truth. It wasn't the cause of the collapse. It was merely the final straw that broke a marriage already fractured by disrespect and deceit. It was the moment the cracks beneath the surface finally shattered the whole foundation. And now, she has to live with the consequences of that choice, and all the choices that led to it, every single day. If there's one thing she has learned from it all, it's that relationships have boundaries for a reason. Not because of jealousy or possessiveness, but because respect matters, trust matters. Putting your partner first matters. She just learned that lesson far too late.